to the No BS Short-Term Rental Podcast, an unfiltered look into the global vacation and short-term rental industry.
I'm Mateo Bradford.
And I'm John Stokinger.
And this is our podcast. We bring the right people to the table at the right time, giving you an inside view and take on the short-term rental industry like no other podcast can. All right, episode 16.
Good morning.
Good morning.
New location.
First time in person.
Yeah, in person with an actual guest here with us.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mateo.
Good morning, John. Good morning.
What's the intro? This is John and I go back and forth on the banter. We're excited. This is our first time in person.
I wasn't sure when to jump in.
Oh, you're good.
No, this is, look, let's be clear. Like, this is special for me. You know, Steve is a friend of mine. Actually, John, I met you and Steve in the same weekend. In Sevierville, Pigeon Forge, at that BRMA housekeeping event. Like,
no, it was a housekeeping / BRMA Intel. It was Amy's event down in Gatlinburg.
So
we all met the same time.
At the same time, it's coming full circle, except for, and I got a good story about how we met Steve. But first of all, welcome Steve to the show. Welcome to the No BS Short-Term Rental Podcast. We're honored to have you on. Thank you for coming on, my friend. And, you know, we're going to dig right in because we got a little time before the conference starts and we got a lot to cover. But for all of you out there, everyone knows who Steve Milo is. Let's be very clear. If you've been in the industry even a couple weeks or a month, you know, you felt his presence within the industry, feared, respected, you know, a force within the industry, you know, and we're going to get to, you know, let you tell your story and talk all about it. But I'm super excited to have you. Founder, VTrips. Lots of huge news to cover around that, but we're going to dig right in. So, John, I kind of want to, and Steve, forgive me for this. I'll let you say whatever you want to say, but I really, you know, lots of people know you for, you know, what you do for the industry. You know, your frank and honest opinions. You're the kind of quintessential no BS person in the industry from my vantage point. Like, you always give it to me straight. No punches pulled. And I think that makes some people uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, it's the truth. Steve, I've never known you to lie. So, like, at the end of the day, you know, how do you, you know, we'll talk about that. But what I want to do today is let's take it back to the beginning. Everyone knows where you're at. We're going to talk about what you just did recently, the huge news for VTrips. It's exciting. Congratulations. Yeah, but absolutely. I want to start at the beginning. I don't think a lot of people know your story, your origin story. Like, how did you get into the business? How did you get into this industry?
Well, I mean, I think I'm like a lot of the new breed, or I got in with one property. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was literally bought a property in Florida, lived in Chicago, had a full-time job, and I was trying to rent it and couldn't find property management. Mm-hmm. At that point, it was right after 9/11, and believe it or not, a lot of companies weren't taking on any new properties. They're having trouble renting what they had. So was in the e-commerce industry, and I decided, hey, look, you know, there's a couple of these websites. One of them was VRBO, Great Rentals, rented.com, and I started listing it on those sites and started to have a lot of volume. And also built a little website called, at that point, Vacation Rental Pros. And so I just started having more demand than supply. And, you know, that's kind of where things went. So it was really just started with one property and got to know the business from literally renting it on my own, managing the cleaning on my own, managing the operations on my own, everything I did on my own.
That's a hell of a feat. I mean, starting with one and then going to, what are you, plus 3,000? Like 3,000 now?
Well, that's a different, you know, that's a different conversation, right? So that's, why did you go from one to maybe 200? And of course that would be, well, once I started taking on properties more than my own, I became a property management because other people wanted me to list. And at some point you know, to really make it enough money, you need 100, 200 properties to really make decent money. And then the decision to go from 200 to 3,000 really was, I think I can scale this. I think I can use technology. I think I can take a look at a lot of the things that are happening in this industry, which were hosted systems, price management tools, things like that, and just really scale this industry and do it in a way where, you know, consolidate companies where it would make sense.
It's interesting. So what point, when did that divergence happen? When did you really say, look, this is, I mean, you started with one, you know, probably built up to a couple, like when was that point when you knew, hey, this is something I can do and I'm gonna do, and when did that growth kind of mindset happen for you?
Happened in stages, right? So the first stage was um, we were basically a regional company based in Ponte Vedra, Jacksonville Beach. And during the recession, I had opportunity to buy companies in St. Augustine, in Flagler Beach, and just accelerate our growth by buying regional companies. And so I bought 4 or 5 regional companies.
Can you go ahead and expand, like, just a timeline, approximate years? I mean, you said this is right after 9/11. So that was, so this is later, but approximately when was that?
All right, so timeline, bought my first property 2002, bought a couple more 2003, 2004, started having other people I know ask me to list and their properties 2005, had about 25 properties, quit my day job in 2006, formed Vacation Rental Pros, and that was right before the housing boom recession.
Mhm.
And from 2006 to 2009, it was pretty much organic growth. We got up to about 300, 400 properties. 2009, bought the first company regionally. And from 2009 to 2014, bought 4 regional companies in Northeast Florida. So Ponte Vedra, Jacksonville, Palm Coast, St. Augustine, Flagler Beach. Just, it's like a 50-mile strip. I just rolled them together.
Right.
And we were, I don't know, 600, 700 properties at that point.
Yeah, pretty small.
Yeah. So that was 2014. And, we were a regional sized company, like many of these companies that are here today at the DARM conference. We were big for our area, and it was a very efficient model.
Right. So, but what happens, when you're at 600 properties, when do you go, all right, let's go, let's go to Gatlinburg, let's go here, let's go ahead and expand into all, from 600, it was the next step, 600 to 3,000. I mean, when was that next?
It was the thought that, to be honest, it was the rental restriction stuff that spooked me.
Yeah.
in the state of Florida. We were in Flagler County, and they literally trying to zone vacation rentals out. And I had a large amount of vacation rental properties that I personally owned and that I rented. And the rental restrictions really scared me because they were talking about completely zoning us out. And we thought, we might lose 30% of our properties. And it was crazy. And, we hired a lobbyist and finally kind of salvaged things in 2014. This was the big fight in 2014 in the state of Florida, where we prevailed by getting at least stopping governments from banning or regulating duration or frequency, but they were able to do everything else. So that really scared me. And what that told me was, look, I've got to diversify outside of the area. So, I thought I had this great situation, but, regulation can happen anytime. And so that's when I started looking at places like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, as a completely different market. Now, the thing about going outside different markets is, those companies were more expensive, and that's where, you needed to get funding. So, but I made the decision, diversification was the way to go. Plus, a bunch of hurricanes started hitting. So,
Right.
Yeah.
It's good timing.
Right. And it's interesting too. You talk about being able to expand and diversification and, the regulatory aspect of what you do, because you are actually a huge champion for the regulatory, gathering of the industry. Every event, I feel like you're helping lead and doing things for the industry, such as, getting the common API initiative that you put together. How have you seen and what really formed your growth strategy outside of, like, you're unique, right? When you look at other people grow, you've built a strategy that has been very successful for you. But when you look at others in this industry, they haven't found that formula, right? Like, they haven't done the tips and tricks. I remember the first time I went down to Ponte Vedra, you showed me the huge winery facility you're building in these other places. Like, you've done unique things within the space really differentiate you from other managers within the space, and it's more strategic, right? And so I think your philosophy, and I want to dig into kind of what that has been and how that's evolved over time. For you to be successful, for VTrips, pushing into where you are now and where you're seeing and where you want to go with that in the future, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, my vision was once I started this was to basically build a hub and spoke,
Mhm.
and that's very different than what some of the other companies have tried to do with how they've expanded. So, normally I think the expansion, if it's a regional player and they're just assimilating properties into a regional brand, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, that's just easy. Like I'm here in one market, I'm going to go next to the next market down the street. I'm just going to roll my brand right in. That's easy. But when you go from Jacksonville, Florida to Gatlinburg, Tennessee to Rios, New Mexico, et cetera, that is much more difficult, and it requires, you know, basically a hub and spoke and a technology platform, and it's hard. And so a lot of companies have struggled with being actually able to create a technology platform. So, some of the things you were talking about is basically the process of um, platforming this industry in a way which laundry actually is one of the things that's, critically important to scale. And so you've got to have it if you're going to do it.
Now, do you in each one of your locations are you building a laundry hub, or if there isn't one there already, or are you acquiring a laundry hub to make sure that you're able to keep scaling and growing in the way that you're growing?
You have to have enough size to do it, but every market we're in, we're thinking about it. So if we can't pull it off, we've got independent contractor companies we're working with. But in all cases, we're looking at it where, hey, is there a point in New Mexico? How big do we need to be able to create our own laundry facility?
So you've gotten to where you are today, and let's dive into this news. So came out last week, and I'm sure obviously you've been thinking about and talking about it a lot longer than last week, but we all the news broke last week that it's Hudson Hill Capital. There's a $250 million investment into VTrips, which is not a small chunk of change.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that process? Tell us about what your plans are to use this. I mean, we all know, I'm assuming that, you're going to use it to scale, but there has to be some specific directions you're wanting to use this capital, and why Hudson Hill Capital as opposed to maybe some other, money.
Well, we've been looking to bring in capital probably for the last 12 months. Hudson Hill just happened to be the firm who I thought was the best fit for us. They're a family fund. Also, we were very clear with them early on. We were looking for a minority investor, not a majority control situation, and that the existing management team and the leadership was critical. So in other words, we would need to be able to govern ourselves and not have, a minority partner have a lot of governance control over us. And they were okay with all that. So we were able to go through a due diligence process. We agreed on valuation early on. They got a pretty decent deal. So I'm sure they're pretty pleased. But we honored the term sheet, and we finally concluded everything last week. What we're going to use the capital for is we're going to accelerate M&A. So we believe pretty clearly there's opportunity because there's a number of sellers for various reasons who want to sell. Some of it is clearly, they've made a ton of money or valuation, and they want to take chips off the table, which is a pretty smart decision for some, because this is their biggest asset in their life, and
Right.
they've got families and generations they probably can take care of through the sale of these companies. The other thing is some people are mentally fatigued.
Yeah.
It's just been brutal with COVID and governments and all this stuff, and so there's just there's sellers that are just, hey, I'm done, and then there's also sellers that are at a certain point in their life where it's just so tough to run businesses because of labor shortages, and how difficult the guests have become because of all the different things going on with COVID. So for a lot of reasons, there's companies that want to sell, and the amount of companies that want to buy have shrunk, and that's due in part because Vicasa bought Turnkey, bought Vicasa bought Wyndham, and so here we are as VTrips. We're an alternative for any company that is thinking of selling who doesn't necessarily have to sell to Vicasa, and we think we can be a very, very strong player in the industry. We actually think we can become eventually the number one player through essentially M&A, and then eventually getting into a SPAC or even an IPO. So we think there's plenty of room to maneuver, and we think we can be in a position where we can be a very, very different player than Vicasa.
I love to hear that. And I think now the climate of the industry is ripe for that, right? Like, one of the things you and I always talk about is business profitability, right? And being able to build a profitable business. And I think one of the things we're seeing now is who did their homework, right? During COVID, when everything changed, managing's always been hard. It's a difficult thing to do. And I don't think people who aren't in the throes of it really understand how challenging it is in this space. Especially today with the technology, like you said, with the guests, like you said, it is a different world.
Well, the people, it's hard to even find people,
right? And yeah, the human capital component of it, and keeping that in place, because all of that are cogs that keep the machine running, and it running well and at a high level is at a challenge. So kudos to you for that, for sure. And it's interesting though, who is sharpening their pencils, who is doing their homework, and I think we're seeing the results of that now. And I think we're going to continue for a little while to see, with you making moves and other people that are trying to make moves within the space, and the people who are like reevaluating their stance and do they really want to do this? Are they really in this to do it and do it well? We're seeing that transformation real time. And I think what's exciting is, you're actually creating what tomorrow's industry is going to look like. We know it's going to be tech-based, right? We know it's going to be customer-centered. But there's a whole host of new challenges coming to you now, right? Like, I think I guess that's my question to you too. Like, what is the number one challenge that you see moving forward for the industry, for managers and companies like yourself?
Well, I mean, 2 years ago, we would have talked about technology, but I think right now it's equally technology and human capital.
Yeah,
I think the human capital component is, in some cases, more problematic than the technology component. So, on the human capital front, it's a tough situation because many of us are operating in resort markets where it's just hard to find people for various reasons. Some people don't want to work. Some people left. They've moved to other places. So that human talent becomes harder and harder. And so the only way we can combat that is with scale, which helps us. So we've expanded our HR group. We now have 5 people. A year ago, we had 2. We now have someone who's bilingual working in our department, because Latino speaking workers are so important to us, particularly for, back of the office type stuff. So housekeeping, laundry facilities where they don't necessarily have to have English as a first language, but it's harder to recruit them if you don't speak with them and know where to advertise. We're exploring H2 and H1B visas for next year because, it's just such an issue. I mean, we're literally working on a proposal to build workforce housing up in Gatlinburg. That's probably going to take a year to get built, but just to be able to put workers up there.
Wow.
So these are things that, a company of scale and size can do, but it's incredible. And then, obviously there's the middle management component as well. That's not quite as difficult to find that, but it's the people that actually are the lifeblood of the company, which is the operations piece. It's your housekeeping and your maintenance workers and stuff like that. Benefits is another big thing. We've been in a series of conversation with benefit brokers about really revamping the way we do business with them, and we may be eventually self-insuring healthcare, but the whole goal is to give more to our employees, give them more options, give them better benefits, because benefits become critical component, more PTO time, more flexibility. I mean, these are all things from a human capital standpoint. And last but not least, hopefully when we're public, stock options, things like that. And we have done some of that with some of our senior level people. But the goal is, if we're public, there's going to be a much more ability for us to allow our employees to share in the upside of the company.
And that's the direction the industry, I feel like, has to go, right? Because at the end of the day, people aren't going to come back to jobs. And I think, the jobs in the back office and, the gritty hands-on jobs that, really keep this industry running, for a long time, people were underpaid and neglected, even when, a lot of the industry always talks about, I mean, we know the importance of those jobs, but I think broadly, those people weren't necessarily taken care of. And that's part of the issue that we're seeing right now in terms of why people have left and other things. They have other opportunities. And I'll say this just to kind of spark it, but I think it's sad when, when the government can give you a little check and that's keeping people home versus, being able to, really go after opportunities that are out there. And we've seen that shift, right? So it's the industry has to change around that space. I think people need to get paid more probably. And like you said, you have to be able to take care of those people or else it's going to be a continuing issue.
Well, it's not just money alone, right? Yeah. So if it was just money, I think everybody would figure out, okay, instead of $10 an hour, we're paying 12. Instead of 12, we're paying 14. I mean, if it was just a money issue, it would be an easier issue to solve. It's finding the people who actually are going to be satisfied taking those jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why, we started to take a look really carefully at who were the people in the laundry facilities who liked it there, and who actually didn't come in and think this is a job that's beneath them, but it's like, this was a good job. Like, it's a safe place, it's air conditioned, heated, whatever, structured, we come in, we do our work. And we found that people where English wasn't their first language, it was a really good job. They had benefits, it was structured, it was safe, clean, and they came in, they did their work. They could come in as early as 7, they could leave at 3:30 or whatever. We were flexible with hours, or we had another shift that was later. And so in general, we found that people where English wasn't their first language, this was a good job, right? And they enjoyed it, and they were very thankful. The difficulty is, where do you find those people where English isn't their first language, right? So you have to have people who are able to communicate with them. And most of those people are, Spanish is their first language, right? So, understanding where you're finding those workers that will be satisfied with these jobs is important. Housekeeping, the same thing. When we were doing this, we were doing independent contractor. And that was great when there were less of a labor shortage, because you would deal with an independent contractor, and the independent contractor would then find subcontractors. But now what we found is, hey, we need to find people who want to do this, and then we're going to give them benefits, and we're going to give them what's very important for them is healthcare for their family. Yeah. And that's why affordable healthcare is so important. And then we're going to give them 40 hours. So every week they're going to know that they have 40 hours, and, we'll pay them mileage and things like that. So finding people who are going to be happy with a housekeeping job is critical, and benefits become a key component of what makes people happy, particularly people with families.
Yeah. Let's talk about briefly. Let's talk about that middle management and that upper management. What happens when you in maybe the not so luxury side of M&A, and you're coming into, say, Gatlinburg or a different community. Name the community, it doesn't necessarily matter. And X company has been there for 20 years, and they have this management that's been set up, and everyone's happy, and blah blah. And then VTrips comes in. There's pros and cons from their eyes in a community. So how do you look at that? Because I know, at least it's my understanding, you're very hands-on in finance, in pricing, and lots of different things. And when you come in and VTrips comes into a community, they have, say, people that have been doing this for a long time, and which is great. This is what happens, and this is business. But how do you go ahead and keep both sides happy and keep, the everything smooth in the communities around you to embrace VTrips coming in?
Well, the first thing is, which we found, is to be very, very careful with the brand. So if the brand is big enough, we're going to use that as the brand in VTrips, the umbrella brand, right? And that doesn't mean that in Panama City we're going to have 20 different brands
Right.
under Panama City. I mean, we're going to be the Resort Collection in Panama City. So Resort Collection was the dominant brand. They've been there for 20 plus years. And so anything in Panama City in future companies, we're just rolling everything into Resort Collection. Same
Which
thing
makes total sense.
right. And then in Fort Myers Beach, we bought Distinctive. We actually are rolling our VTrips brand into Distinctive because Distinctive, again, had been there 20 years,
Right.
very successful.
Yeah.
So what we've done very carefully is, in general, we're really good with middle management and down. So the middle management typically is, the people who were doing all the work to begin with. And, what we're doing is we're coming in with bonuses, ability for them to get more money, and then obviously benefits, which a lot of places they didn't even have really
Right.
the type of healthcare or dental and stuff like that. So now they have dental and stuff like that, better PTO, that type of stuff. And then the workers down benefit as well. I mean, now we have matching 401ks, we have all kinds of benefits and stuff like that. So the key for us is, okay, we're giving them more money, we're giving them better benefits. Now we need to make sure that they are happy. And part of it is not to mess with the middle management. It's just to let them run as long as they can kind of run within our system. And so our goal is, okay, how do we transition them off their software system,
Right.
and into a new software system, and make them understand, hey, this is actually going to be a better system, right? So, and that's trust, right? They just have to trust that, when we move from Springer Miller to Track, it's a better system, right? Springer Miller is like, okay, we understand, Springer Miller, but Track is a better system and actually be better for your owners, better for your guests, better for you. You have to trust us that what we're good at is technology. You're really good at cleaning and managing people and managing maintenance and managing service orders and owner communication and guest communication. You're great at this. Let us make sure we show you how much better Track is than Springer Miller. Or in Fort Myers, migrating from Barefoot to Track. Yeah, Barefoot was great. It's but it's limited, right? And it's extremely limited. And Track is just a superior. And then it's understanding, like, why is Track so much better? Well, there's so much, owner portal, guest portal, nightly pricing, more channels, all these things that are going to benefit your guest, your owner, because the guest will have more places to find the inventory available on. The owner is going to be happier, more money. You're going to be happier because it's easier to manage the business. So
Right.
that's the trade-off, right? It's to try to sell them on the stuff we're going to bring to them. That's going to be a change, which is the technology. We're going to actually, try to get them to buy in that the technology is going to actually be a win for them.
And changing software sucks.
Like change, period. In the industry
and-
sucks. Like, people are resistant to change, whatever it is. Whether
Right.
you're changing, when you think about it, also from an institutional level, when you're changing in an organization, and especially through acquisition, we hear it all the time, right? Like, oh, it's the boogeyman theory, right? Like, oh, the hope that they bought us, it's going to be bad. No one's ever, I think that's people's initial response to that. But you have to look at what the long-term value is. And we never really hear, right? Hey, what does this transition look like? And Steve, I'm going to be in your ear, like, about this, the entire time as you're going through the acquisition, because I'm interested. I want to know. I know it's a challenge. It's hard. Like, you can't just change a culture overnight, and some people aren't going to be with it.
Right.
But it's a process, and those who have a good strategy and really do care about their people will be able to do it successfului, right?
Some of it is, so you got to get the middle management to buy in, which is the bonus program. And some of it, they know. I mean, like, we're going into large companies. They know that keyless access is just a better process than a VIN card. Well, the VIN card's a problem because people lose it. I mean,
Right.
you need to have a
me.
desk. I mean,
It
whereas
gets
if you have
demagnetized.
it gets demagnetized, it's just, come on. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? So we know that keyless. Now there's a cost, right? There's a cost to put Kava or Yale locks on every door. I mean, particularly if it's like 1,000. I mean, but hey, look, if we're willing to underwrite the cost and put a Kava lock up there, And then the Cabo lock has all the all the codes, and it has fail-safe codes. So if somebody forgets it and has to call our 800 number, and in the middle of the night, we can give an emergency code. This solves so many problems because you don't need front desk. Owners have their own code. Plus, we can track people coming and going.
Right.
The VIN card is just such ancient technology. Or worse, keys. I mean, we're in places where they still giving out keys. It's like, this is so terrible. And so it's getting people to understand, hey, look, we get it. It's a headache to install all these Cabo locks.
And it's new things to think about than they weren't necessarily thinking about. But what I think through an acquisition side of things is there's new things that they have to think about, but there's also less things that they have to think about, because you're coming in as VTrips and say, hey, we got this all handled. Now, okay, you have these new things in, but again, it's all part of that process, that transition. And if once adopted, and I talk about this all the time with processes and software, is if you dive in with both feet and you learn it, it's going to be hard for a little bit. But once you do it, and you do it to our, SOP, it's going to be so much better.
Yeah, but that's a leap of faith, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
At the end, you gotta, that's the part. That's where you have to be convincing with people and get them to understand, that, hey, you gotta trust the process, right? Like, you gotta, and having a track record of success helps in that space, but the actual, theory and practicality are very different in that.
Well, and then also some of this stuff has to be driven from the top down. So just giving people bonus doesn't necessarily drive it. I mean, you've got to be able to hold them accountable to goals.
Yeah.
And what the big thing about goals is, you get a bonus, but also how are you measuring up to your peers? Mm-hmm. So you get a peer here in New Mexico working on this project, a peer here in Tennessee, a peer here in Panama City. How are you doing? Because you're all working more or less with the same resources, the same timeline. We're working with you to do these projects outside of season. How are you executing? And so that's great too, where we have not necessarily competition, but we have peers where they can talk to each other, and they can say, how are you doing this? And a lot of it is goal expectation, management expectation, and in the middle management then really kind of communicating to their line staff, hey, here's what we need to do. So it's critically important.
Yeah, I agree. So talk to me about what. Let's dig into something. Like, I want to get into your viewpoint on what the future of the industry looks like in the near future. What's 2022 going to look like? Are we going to? I know we'll see more deals. I know we'll see that, but for the average person in the space right now, what's the biggest challenge outside of like the human capital component for managers? What do you see? And let's speak U.S., right? We can go talk about international later, but in the U.S., what do you see the landscape looking like over the next year?
Well, obviously, right. So we touched on the challenges of human capital. That's going to be a problem for a while, and a challenge. And then the other issue is really government regulations. I was talking to someone last night. He's up in Colorado, and it's just, it's just a headache trying to maneuver around these challenges the government says, where you can only put one family per house or property. Right. It's like, how do you even know? What's the definition of a family? I mean, right. what are we talking here?
Who's policing this? How is it?
And now, and so, constantly changing governments. The fact that there's governments that are literally, in some cases, meeting to determine how many rentals they'll even allow in a community. They're going to restrict. These are terrible issues that are happening across the board, and this industry is so underfunded in terms of really advocacy compared to like the hotel lobbyists. And it's a problem because as much as I've done for advocacy, it's still just a small portion of what we need to do. And unfortunately, there's so many people I've spoken to, even just since I've gotten here, who are facing pretty significant regulation issues that could zone them out or could make it so that new owners can't get a license to operate a vacation rental, which effectively dooms their market.
Well, we see it firsthand in Atlanta right now. So over the past year, I've been working with Dave and Rent Responsibly, because Atlanta is going from no regulation to an STR ordinance that and we can go into it in detail some other time, but like it's one of those being in the middle of that. So first of all, Airbnb was driving it literally to the point where they were actually writing it for the city council and actually writing the ordinance. And then what they came out with was something that didn't have any commercial exclusions, didn't have like, it was, I'll be honest, it was the most asinine thing I've ever seen put on paper. And it was due to the ignorance of the leaders in the space, Airbnb driving Airbnb's initiatives and the lack of additional voices. And I was like, I'm in the midst of this. I'm working with Airbnb, we're working with hosts, we're trying to put this thing together. And we felt like we were on an island. It was like, where's everybody else? Like, what's happening? And my frustration for Atlanta, and this is just the city of Atlanta, not the Atlanta metro area. This is like the city of Atlanta. They built a whole ordinance that was based on just hosts, and no professional considerations. And so that part was super frustrating. And if that's what's going on in the rest of these cities and in these places, we got a problem. Like, and we do need to get together, because I was looking for where's the backup? Where's BRMA? Where's the rest of these, these institutions for a city the size of Atlanta, something that is, a huge hospitality city, year-round market, right? Major, whether it's sports, whether it's college, Atlanta's a huge market for STR. And what they put out, and I'll share it with you, and it's laughable. It's absolutely laughable. And so like that part I'm really concerned with. I appreciate everything you're doing in that space, and all of everyone that's at these last two conferences that are really kind of pushing this narrative. But how do we get the rest of the industry involved?
Well, that could be a whole nother podcast.
It's a loaded question.
It's
a bandwidth issue.
It's a bandwidth issue. It's a resource issue. It's a capital issue. Part of our goal to try to get to a public offering or a SPAC in 2022 and beyond is to have, the capital to start to be able to create our own government advocacy component at VTrips, which right now is me, but hopefully would be more than just me. And, what we would want to do is work with the other very, very large players in the space, which, we're starting to see some big players like Inhabit IQ. I see some very positive things out of them. Clearly Track's been involved, Rent Responsibly, that whole stuff, and really focus on things that we think we can have tangible results, because we're not going to be able to battle everywhere, right? And there's going to unfortunately be some causes that we're going to just have to say, hey, look, it just doesn't make sense. The Poconos, there's not enough managers in the Poconos. We're sorry. There's just, there's certain battlegrounds we're not going to be able to take on, but we're going to have to pick and choose where we go. Now, I've been a big fan of doing this at the state level. Yeah. And the reason why I like doing it at the state level is it sounds strange, but it's a little less political than at the local level, where it becomes extremely driven by local interests. At least at the state level, the state is, in general, a bit of a check and balance between local governments, where at the state level, you can talk to them and say, hey, look, this is a revenue issue. This is a property rights issue. Look at the economic impact that it has on employment and stuff like that. And we need some protection. So that local government can't just zone it out. So, that's another issue too, which is, instead of trying to battle at every municipality, go to the state level, which we were trying to do in Georgia, by the way, and try to figure out, hey, how can we get certain things written into law where we protect the industry, still allowing local government to have some ability to maneuver, but they can't just zone us out.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's the only way to go, that we're going to be successful in this space. Like, we have to be able to lock arms and agree that this is critical to the success of everyone within this space. And it's one thing to support it from the outside and say, yeah, advocacy is great, but like, we really have now I really feel like going through this experience in Atlanta and working with Dave and the work that they've been doing in Rent Responsibly, like you unless we all come together on this, it's going to be a problem, and it's going to be a real problem for people's businesses. Because like taking Atlanta out of this, like, how are you going to build an ordinance that has no commercial exceptions? And then they did something crazy. It was like saying you could only have 2+1 rentals per person and no commercial exclusion. So like even saying the entities, we're gonna have to create like all these LLCs. It's a mess. And thank God it's not going through. They had to revise. It was that bad. They were like, they had to revise it. But
well, I mean, Georgia would be a good example where you go at the state level and we try to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
You know, we tried to do something about 2 years ago in Georgia. Part of it is also we need state chapters. You know, we have a state chapter in Florida. We have one in North Carolina, but Georgia really doesn't have one. So, you know, it's going to take at the state level, really. You know, I hate to be so pragmatic about this, but we could fight in every little city in Georgia, or we could go to the state level and try to figure out how do we go to the state level and at least protect inherent rights, which happened in Arizona, happened in Florida. You know, and that's really going to be the issue. Now, there's certain states that are more likely at the state level to allow stuff like that than others, but at least let's pick off those 10 or 12 states where we think we have a chance at the state level to protect the industry. And then we can maybe take a look at some of the other ones and say, hey, look, here's what we've done at, you know, 10 or 12 of these states. You know, Colorado, is there a chance you can take a look at what we've done here?
Right. And I think that getting those preemptive clauses in there, I think is a smart approach, right? Like if you I think you're absolutely right. At the state level, get those preemptive clauses in there so that at least you have a framework to, you know, allow the smaller municipalities to work around. They have a base to go off of that's actually rooted in something sensible versus, you know, what the emotion of the day is, right? Atlanta, that's what we're seeing over the past year. Atlanta's been open, and so like everyone's like freaking out because everyone's come to Atlanta to party for the last year. Why would you? And that's actually affecting the ordinances in Atlanta. It's crazy, but it's the reality. And so, I think it's interesting, and I think I appreciate everything you're doing in that space. We're going to continue to support it, and advocates here on the No BS podcast. We're going to continue to push the advocacy part of that.
Speaking of that, real quick, you know, I was at so we are at the VRMA and Intel DARM conference, but BRMA had the advocacy thing last night. It was great. We had one a couple months back in Destin, which raised a ton of money. We raised some money last night, and you know, the No BS short-term rental podcast it's a small chunk of change, but we were very happy to go ahead and donate $500 towards the VRMA advocacy fund. And I encourage anyone that's listening, this money, and maybe Steve can kind of like, you know, kind of go into what this money is used for.
Plug it.
Sure. But anyone that wants to go ahead and donate even a little bit to the advocacy fund, I mean, this is what it's used for. We'll let Steve jump in here, and you can reach out to us, and we'll go ahead and put you in contact with the right people at BRMA.
Sure. Yeah, so we've raised over $300,000 this year. So you know, I started this thing at zero in 2019 was our first year for advocacy, and first year we raised about a little over 100,000, and then last year with COVID we raised we actually made it to 250,000, and then this year we're already over 300. So, but you know what we're looking to do is two things: either educational issues like economic impact studies, affordable housing studies, which, you know, reviewed this issue where vacation rentals take away affordable housing, which is really it makes no sense, but this is one of the things now that's been commonly espoused as a reason to ban vacation rentals, is they're taking away affordable housing, which is just, we have to educate people that this is just absolutely not the truth. And then the other thing is to seed certain projects like state chapters to get them off the ground, and even PR campaigns. So
and these things aren't cheap. You know, like any of these studies, they're not cheap. They're, you know, $15,000. They're, you know, at a minimum. So I mean, that's what, you know. So I just want to kind of, it's not like this $300,000 is only going to go so far.
Well, and that's why you need broader support throughout the industry, right? Like that's why this is an issue for all of us to tackle. And shout out to those who are leading, you know, that charge. But this is something that we all have to get around and push towards, because we're all affected by it.
It's already biting us.
Yeah. So I got a question for you, Steve. Honest question. You are a force in the industry. You know, you're always present. Talk to me about, you know, down the line, when you look, when it's all said and done, what do you want your mark on the industry to be? What do you want, when we look back, when we say, hey, this Steve Milo is here, what does that look like? What do you want that to be? What do you want your legacy to stand for?
Well, I mean, hopefully, first and foremost, I've built a brand in VTrips that people can hold their head high and say, hey, look, this is a brand of a professional national vacation rental company, and it means something both in quality and in standards. So hopefully once I'm retired, just like there's a brand called Hilton or Marriott, there's the VTrips brand, and people recognize what VTrip means, and it has value, and it has a lasting legacy. Second thing for the industry itself, hopefully what people are going to remember me for is advocacy, that we have done things to support the industry, to make sure that we are fairly treated by governments. And every year we keep raising more and more money. Hopefully it won't be hundreds of thousands. Hopefully it'll start to be millions of dollars. And we start to make some real progress towards protecting our industry. So really, I mean, those are really the two things. I mean, we could talk about other fun stuff like OTA bashing and things like that, but I'm sure people will love that. But it's advocacy.
It reminds me. I think that's a fair point, and and going into the next question is like, I want to get your honest opinion on the tech space in our industry too. Like, where is that going?
Well, I mean, the technology space, I think where we're heading to is more enterprise companies, enterprise software systems that are more affordable to property management companies, and that allow basically them to run hosted systems in a more efficient way. So, I mean, the technology is becoming more and more efficient. You've had, obviously we have Track. Guesties received massive funding. Streamline obviously is owned by Inhabit IQ. So, in theory, these products can continue to be built so that they are better and better for property managers to use for our superhosts, et cetera, right? And that's going to benefit the guest, the owner, and the principals as well. We're going to continue to see, I think, more and more niches. Breezeway is a good example. Be Home 247 is an example where, they're focused on different components, whether it's smart lock, whether it's service, whether it's cleaning, whatever, that's going to help, again, manage better ways of the guest, the owner, your employees, so that you can manage the business, make it less complicated. I think we're going to see that. And then, from the OTA side, we're going to see more and more ability for companies to do distribution. And Google is probably going to be a big part of this. So I'm pretty optimistic of where we're heading. And I think, from my standpoint, companies like us are in a good position because we've taken technology and we're running with it, as opposed to some companies that I've met, and they're telling me, hey, I'm 80% direct, I'm 70% direct. And I'm thinking, well, you should be trying to do everything you can to broaden your base.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to be technology based, right? You're going to have to leverage, technology in that space. It's going to be huge. I agree.
So if back in the day, and this reminds me of the story again, back to that Gatlinburg when Mateo and I met. So Mateo reminds me of, and I'm reminded of the first time I really knew who Steve Milo was when everyone was, and this is in your OTA bashing days. It was actually at BRMA Eastern in Miami. And you had at least one big, maybe two big speeches, and it was packed to the gills and going out, and I can't remember who it was that day. But back to Gatlinburg, Mateo tells me a story. When he first met you, what was he wearing?
So this is a story. So this is my second conference in the industry. I don't know anybody here. I'm in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I'm just, hey, how you doing? Fresh green, meeting everyone. And working for Reddit at the time. Shout out to Andrew, Reddit, everyone there. And I was going around and he's like, hey, you got to talk to Steve Milo. He's like, talk to him. He's like, go introduce yourself. It's someone you got to meet. And I was like, all right, who the hell is Steve Milo? I was like, all right, I got to figure him out. And I think I forgot who I asked somebody else, and they're like, "Oh, he's the guy with the TripAdvisor desk shirt on." And I was like, "The TripAdvisor desk shirt." And this is why I love Steve to this day. When I met Steve, and I have this picture to this day. I actually, and I'll send it to you again, Steve, because I have this picture. I was like, he had the TripAdvisor shirt with the Grim Reaper holding the TripAdvisor owl's head and like a sickle on the other side with a blazer on. And I was like, I love this guy. And again, I didn't, at the end of the day, I didn't know what any of that meant, and I didn't get it. But when you learn, but it's interesting, and it's driving a narrative and a conversation that I think is welcoming in this industry. Like, I think too often people just accept things in this space and don't challenge enough. And that's one of the things I appreciate you and what you bring to this industry. I know it probably ruffles people's feathers on the other side of that, but good. Like, at the end of the day, that's good for us to be having diverse conversations. We don't want to all just be falling in line and being like, okay, well, we're just going to do what everybody else does. Like, it's good to have that. And so, like, I appreciated that. And God knows, like, Andrew was like, go find Steve Milo. I was like, who's Milo? Where do I get him? And I'm this random guy just, hey, Steve, how are you? Mateo from Reddit. But no, it's been great ever since then. And so it's, and I appreciate it, Steve. I appreciate the candor. I think the industry, whether they love you or hate you, appreciate that check. And sometimes people need that little nudge in the rib that says, look, this doesn't make any sense. Like, hey, let's talk about these things. Let's bring it to the table. And, sometimes that's not always comfortable, but I think we're better off for it.
Yeah. It's being comfortable isn't necessarily the right direction to go.
Facts.
So.
Well, and I have the ability to speak. So, not everybody has the power to be able to get up there and basically talk about something that's bad for the industry. And, I pick and choose my battles, but, there's been some companies that just have done some stuff that needs to be called out. And, I know I ruffled a lot of feathers at Verbo about Matchback, but I thought it was ridiculous what they did at that point. Mm-hmm. It was really underhanded, and they eventually backed down. Mm-hmm. Now I'm really focused on kind of talking about Vicasa because, I think they're bad for the industry. I just don't believe they're good for the industry. And I think educating owners who are potentially talking to Vicasa about what it means to sell to Vicasa is important. It means probably your employees are going to be fired. They're going to destroy your brand, and you probably are going to need to lead the community if you sell to them. And look, this is a company who was supposed to be at this conference and literally, without any notice, contacted Amy Hynone and said, we're not going to make it. Who does that? They were speaking at this industry event, and they're not going to be here. They have no respect for our industry. Their CEO hasn't even attended one of these conferences. I'm not even sure he's been to many of the offices. And I don't know how industry outsiders are going to manage a business that is this complex and requires the level of understanding of operations and people. And that's what I'm talking about is, look, it's not just getting money. It's who do you sell to? Do you care about your employees? If you say, hey, my employees are like family to me, then why would you put them in an abusive relationship?
Devil's advocate though, what happens when VTrips goes public? Is that a different story?
Well, yeah, I'm running the company.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, but that's part of the story, right? And Clue and I are good friends. That's not how Vicasa started, right? When you talk about the beginning of Vicasa, that was a completely different animal, an organic, different place, right? That was people centered, and everyone that you talked to that was part of Vicasa during those days, it was an amazing story, and it sounded like it was an amazing place, but scaling, case in point, scaling's hard, right? And it's not perfect.
Well, they sold out. They sold out and they lost control of the company. And The entire leadership team is completely different than what existed 3 years ago. Even, I mean, everybody who was basically part of the original team was let go.
Yeah.
Anyone with a Breon in their name was let go. I mean, they
Yeah.
were all gone,
Yeah.
and so instead, it's been replaced with people from Angie's List and Open Table and people who have no understanding. They basically say they're a technology company, that they're, like Etsy. And I mean,
Interesting.
it just makes no sense. I mean,
Yeah.
this, we're in the hospitality space.
Right.
We're not.
They're good points. I mean, definitely valid points. You're coming from, you're in the hospitality space, built from hospitality, and that's how Vicasa started too. I mean, they hospitality minded people, but it's for sure like things have changed.
Well, we're going to look back, and again, this period of growth within our industry, and I was like, I feel like I'm lucky to be a part of it, and to be able to watch it. I think when we, 20 years from now, when we're looking back, there wasn't a roadmap, right? Like what Steve's doing, what Vicasa's doing, they're trudging their own paths, for better or for worse. Like that's,
Right.
I don't, I think at the end of the day, what will, people will look at is what the result is, right? Like, and we went through this stage of mass professionalization, but it's under the model of the traditional corporate structure, right? And that's what Vicasa did. Like their goal was clear within that space: build the monster, keep feeding the monster, keep growing in that space. And you lose people during that. You lose direction in that space. And when you completely change and get the organization, you're going to lose all of that. And then what you're left with is whoever you have in that space driving an entity.
Right.
We're hospitality, so like that's always going to be the challenge for companies to scale, right? Like
you just talked about looking back 20, in 20 years, looking back, Steve's been in this business for 20 years now. And back then, and even now, I was talking to someone last night, and I said, "Oh, it's kind of like it's the Wild West back then." And the guy's like, gentleman I was talking with last night, he said it's still the Wild West, but now we just have trains. and I thought it was a great analogy. Because we're right in the middle of this. It's still, everything's like fresh and new, and we're pioneering, but we just have trains now. And so we have like different mechanisms and ways to get there. And you're right. What's it going to look like in 20 years from now? And how do we lay those lines? Anything?
You got the answer to that?
No, I don't. But if I did, I'd be a rich man. Steve, anything you want to go ahead and leave the audience with today?
Well, I mean, I think what's important really, again, is just going to be the discussion on human capital. How are you going to be able to continue to find people to take on these jobs on the front line? And it's an important conversation, and there's no one answer, right? But I think clearly 2021, the biggest challenge was human capital. And it's going to be the biggest challenge for 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to also, and next time, and we'll bring you back, because I definitely want to talk about the API stuff. I don't know where we're at with that, but I think that's going to be huge for us too, as an industry moving forward, right? Like to be able to, can we get to that common, from a tech standpoint? I think it's going to be huge. And I know you were driving the effort, so I was part of that and supportive of that. I think we still need it, honestly, for us to really grow as a industry and professionalize as a whole. But
briefly get into it. And I know we got to wrap this up here, but if I'm to look, I think the consolidation on the tech front, as and please correct me if I'm wrong, is actually helping that.
Yes,
the consolidation is helping, and is bringing together, and these and in cleaner code is making it easier to go ahead and to work this all out. So I think those are some of the really big positive takes from this tech consolidation. You have the PM consolidation, you have the tech consolidation, and these are all positive things, which is cleaning up some of this messy BS that's out there. I think in time it's going to work itself out. It definitely needs kept pushing in the right direction. But I mean, is that what you're seeing, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am seeing the benefits from the technology side of scale, that some of these companies are getting bigger and they're able to kind of create some standards. So, we're going to definitely see a gap, but the new breed of technology that's comes out, the Guesties of the world, track, obviously GSV's importing huge amounts of money into their tech stack. They're going to put the emphasis on writing clean API, as opposed to what used to happen, which was everybody had different standards and no one really paid attention to it. So it's going to get easier, and that's going to make it easier for companies like a Breezeway to succeed as well, because they're not having to have a team of developers just focus on keeping the API going.
Steve, pleasure as always. Thank you so much. Really
man.
appreciate you joining us today.
Always, man. Thank
Right.
you. We'll
Thanks.
definitely have you back soon.
Live. This will be Thursday. It's coming out from the Francis Marion Hotel in Charleston. Thank you for joining us this week, and more to come.
Yeah, shout out to Amy. Great, and looking forward to this conference. Also, stay tuned. We will have some pretty important announcements about BRMA coming up, some things we have going on there as well. So like the channel if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you next week.